All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Lindsay Wong, and I am an author and associate professor of creative writing in the English department at the University of Winnipeg. I'm a Chinese woman with blonde hair, and there is a painting of maple leaves behind me. I want to welcome you all to our sixth event for our publishing speaker series, and today we are featuring a reading and Q&A with acclaimed author Kevin Chong, who is such a force in the literary world of both nonfiction and fiction. He is a generous mentor and supporter of other writers who is always available to offer help and advice. It is a universal rule that brilliant writers are not nice people, but if you ask 99.5% of writers working today in Canada, they always have really amazing things to say about Kevin and his work. Today's event will be recorded, so if you do not want to be on camera, please keep your video off. We also ask you to keep your mics muted. We have a lot of questions submitted already, so we will only turn to chat if there is time. I want to thank the Writers Union of Canada for supporting this event and allowing us this opportunity to invite authors to our institution. Today, we acknowledge that we live and work in the territories of the Shinabog, Cree, Dakota, Dene, Métis, and Ojibwe nations. The University of Winnipeg sits in Treaty 1 territory, ancestral and traditional homeland of Anishinaabe peoples. As a settler of color writer, I am not only committed to honoring and following the lead of the land, water, and cultural protectors of this space, but I also am a constant and forever student of the remarkable stories and their tellings by Indigenous peoples here and around the world. Thank you so much for this space, and I'm very grateful for everyone to joining us today. And if you feel moved to, please share where you're coming from in the chat on Zoom. So I'm very excited to welcome Kevin Chong, who is the author of 7 books of fiction and nonfiction, including the novel The Double Life of Benson Yu. I have 2 copies here, which was a finalist for the 2023 Scotiabank Giller Prize, which is a huge deal for those of you who don't know, and named a Best Book of Canadian Fiction by the CBC. His books have been named Books of the Year by Globe and Mail, National Post, and Amazon.ca, listed for a CBC Prize, a BC Book Prize, and a National Magazine Award, optioned for film and TV, and published in the US, Europe, and Australia. His creative nonfiction and journalism have appeared in The Guardian, The Times Literary Supplement, The Rumpus, and the South China Morning Post. So let's all welcome Kevin.
Thank you. Thanks for the generous introduction, Lindsay. It's so nice to be here speaking with you all on Zoom. Should I start with the reading, Lindsay?
Yes, would you like to start?
Yeah. Lindsay was really well prepared and sent me this whole itinerary. And as soon as we start talking, I just forgot what everything was supposed to happen. And but I think the reading was part of it. So I'm going to read from the first chapter of my book. It follows like a letter that the character sends to the narrator, and the letter that the character sends the narrator sends the narrator spiraling because the person writing the letter was his abuser. And so he starts thinking of a story about himself as a child, and he starts trying to tell the story of his childhood. And as he tells the story of his childhood, it sort of warps a bit because he's once again trying to skirt the truth. And as he tries to skirt the truth, the story starts going in directions that he doesn't want them to go to. So you don't need to know that quite so soon, but I just wanted to give you a bit of an overview of the book. And the introduction is just about the boy and his grandmother, and you can hear the narrator interjecting a lot throughout. So here we go. A few days after I received that noxious letter from C, the boy appears for the first time. The picture fills my eyes, and the most expedient way to clear them is by writing it down. I see the boy on the street cowering behind his grandmother. That's his default pose. He's holding a fold-up cart. His ailing pawpaw nudges him forward. Up until a month ago, the old woman pulled the 2-wheeled cart herself. Then one morning, after she'd been coughing through the night, she made the boy do it. On that initial outing, as they embarked on their errand running, she made a point of moving at her typically brisk pace. It's just my hand, she said in Cantonese with a village accent she used only around family, like a pair of ugly slippers. It hurts, that's all. It'll be fine tomorrow. But then she asked him to pull the cart again the next day. Every week on Sundays, this depleted family unit makes their rounds to the markets for dried scallops, for pea shoots and watercress, for oxtail and tripe. Everyone knows Paw Paw. She used to teach Chinese school to half of them in the church basement. Everyone stands up straighter, eyes jittering, the second she appears. Whenever he's out with Paw Paw, the boy worries about seeing kids from his class. Their side eyes and smirks could strip paint. Those jerks will wait until they're in the schoolyard to tell a boy to recognize his clothes from gift shop, clearance racks, and church donation bins. He'll ask him where his parents are, as though he hasn't told them already. Now that he pulls the cart, the shopkeepers direct their attention to him first, as the person who handles the business. They all know better than to see him as in charge, but this way they don't have to meet the gaze of the woman who had picked their Chinese names from a roll to recite classical poetry. Today it's Mr. Ma who runs the convenience store across the street. "Dai lo," he says from the back of the store. He's finished stacking cans of soup. "How may we serve you?" he says in Cantonese. Papa tuts, her voice like the rasp she uses on her feet before bedtime, and allows the boy, guess we're going to call him Benny, to choose a shrink-wrapped package of snack cakes for acing his math test. One indulgence he's earned from pulling the cart is getting to stop here first. He no longer has to wait until the errands are done for his weekly treat. "You're acting as though he's the one paying for everything," she reminds Mr. Ma. "One day he will. Big head, big brain, wall," says Mr. Ma, rubbing his hands on his flannel shirt sleeves as he follows them to the front of the store. The sides of his face are crinkled from all the smiling he does. His daughter sits behind the cash register. Benny's cheeks warm at the sight of the girl. I cringe to picture him this way, fluorescent with hormonal yearning around Mr. Ma's daughter Shirley. I've changed her name, although the real one is pretty similar. Only a few years ago, Benny and Shirley did everything together, watching TV, playing Transformers, drawing, even eating on most days from the same bowl of macaroni, peas, and ham and broth, back when his mother had grown too weak to work and babysat her for extra cash. Now he can't speak to her. "Why can't I have at least one smart child, La?" the shopkeeper says to her. "Shirley's older brother, Y, works at the store when forced, but otherwise runs with the wrong kids, the ones who wear clothes their parents can't afford. Look at him," Mr. Ma tells his daughter, "always on the honor roll, nose in books, team." He takes after his grandmother, Shirley says in English, staring at her lap as she struggles to wipe her mouth clean of a smirk. She has an oblong face with wide cheekbones and tendrils of hair that escape from her ponytail. Her bright eyes and a readily pursed expression complement a thorny demeanor that the boy will always be drawn to. "Look who I have to take after." Mr. Ma wags an open palm at her, his eyes glinting with amusement, begging to be hated. Paw Paw slides the cupcakes across the counter and produces a folded $5 bill from the lanyard money pouch where she keeps her senior's bus pass. Shirley opens the register and calculates the change in her head. "Your girl is even better with numbers than my grandson, Wah," Papa says. "Every child has a different strength." The shopkeeper seems stumped by this praise from a woman who offers so little of it. Praise from her always feels unprecedented. As they're leaving, Mr. Ma gathers his wits and holds out a candy bar. Benny stares at the treat, like he's never heard the name before. It's probably chocolate. It's probably good. It's free. Why can't it just be a normal candy bar, a Snickers or a Mars bar, and not something that came over on a boat? "A gift for Dilo," Mr. Ma says to Pawpaw, "free of charge." "Nonsense," Pawpaw says, and hands Benny 2 quarters to pay for it. Shirley reaches out. He wishes his fingertips weren't so grimy as they glance along her palm. She turns away when she takes the money. Benny eats the snack cakes once they step outside, eats them so fast as though he's trying to hide them from himself. Papa would chide him for eating so quickly, except that she's in a hurry. He'll save the candy bar for later. That shopkeeper doesn't pay taxes, Wall. That's why his girl is so good at numbers. Don't tell her you know all of that, La, Papa says to him once they reach the next block. "Why are you standing around, acting so dopey around Mr. Ma?" "I wasn't," Benny insists, moving a step ahead of her down the hill to their first stop. At night he will picture Shirley, the way she flutters her eyelashes and tucks in the left corner of her mouth when she's embarrassed. He sits behind her in their history and English block so he can watch her ponytail sway for up to 2 hours a day. They pick up vegetables at a greengrocer, chicken feet at the butcher shop. The people at those stores don't fawn over him as much. Just got a page stuck. Uh, at the butcher's, Pawpaw slips on the wet linoleum but reaches for the counter to prevent a fall. Throughout their walk, the big hill back to their cream-colored concrete housing development looms for Benny. The first few days pulling the cart were muscle-scorching slogs, ones that underscored his softness, and he wondered how Pawpaw managed that task all these years. But the sum of that effort has made him more resolute, if not stronger. Today he feels as though he can sail up that hill. When he turns around to see Pawpaw midway down the block, her body seems to be twisting. Hands aloft like a surfer's along a concrete wave, she clamps a handkerchief to a face that's purple with distress. As Benny starts to hurry back, the cart turns over. Stooping over to pick up the scattered groceries on the sidewalk, he sees Pawpaw reaching for a lamppost, but missing it, then crashing. I'm going to stop there. Thanks for listening so far.
Took me a while to unmute. I couldn't find it. But thank you. I love that chapter. This whole book is such a literary triumph. I could go on about, the craft, the characters, how it's metafiction, as you know.
Mhm.
So
Thank you
you
for all the
are,
kind words,
sorry?
and thank you for all the kind words. And, uh, you were like one of the beta readers of the book in the draft form. And, again, you talk about me being a mentor, but, you're a great community member as well. And were really helpful, in my sort of journey with this book.
Well, thank you for saying that. I think I was that person though who didn't understand the book, and I wrote to you. I said, "Is he insane? Like, what is going on?" So I
That's
don't know.
useful
Maybe
though,
that.
because my book's a little confusing, and it was more confusing when you read it, and it's still kind of convoluted, and you have to kind of like think, and this is a guy telling a story about his life, but it's not really his life, and then think. So it's like it's one of those books that kind of like you can sort of chart out, and I kind of get it when people don't want to read something like that. It's not everyone's cup of tea. So that kind of feedback was the best kind of feedback, though. You can't really argue with someone just being confused by your book, like someone who's smart and reads books, and their feedback is, well, I'm not sure exactly what happened there. And I feel like that's a good note. It's something you can't sort of counteract. It's like, so you think to yourself, how can you make it clear? Like, how can I tell a story in a way that signposts certain things?
Yeah, we're always talking about that in workshop. Students sometimes think getting feedback is negative, but at all levels of our career, we really need to have a really strong eye, I think, to look at our work.
Yeah, and it's sometimes the feedback. Sometimes someone will suggest something, like your character should wear this purple hat, and you think it's like, well, I don't think my character should wear that hat, but like then you realize there's something about the reaction that makes sense to you. It's not their fix, their solution isn't the right thing, but what they notice, and if a lot of people notice the same thing, is something you have to think about. Like sometimes, like a lot of people can be wrong about your story, and you just say, well, you're not my reader. But if you want them to be a reader, then you have to like try to work with that note. And it's one thing to like be in a workshop where everyone is forced to read your work, at the pain of like a failing grade, and like the whole sort of indifferent mass of readers and of editors getting things in the slush pile. It's and that was like a real transition for me as a student, going from a student to being like a writer and writing
Mhm.
to an audience, and trying to get my book published, and then trying to get a readership, like what do you have to make clear? What do you have to explain? Like what do you have to do? How do you keep a reader's attention? I don't think I really had all those tools, like even after grad school. I don't think they really taught me in grad school, like how to write a story that captured someone's attention outside of the workshop, and that may have been my own failing as a student, but definitely wasn't something I came out of school knowing exactly how to do.
Those are really good points. And I think someone touched on it today in workshop. Someone said, you're all being forced to read my story, right?
Mhm.
And in the real world, no one's being forced to buy a book or continue reading it, right? Which is just so important. Um, and this, I think, goes back to, your career, you're multi-genre, you're also an author and creative writing professor. Can you maybe talk about your trajectory to becoming a successful published author? Today I gave them the whole agent speech today, so I think I disappointed a few of them.
Oh, yeah, the world changes so much, like in terms of like I published my first book like 23 years ago. I'm like 49 years old now, uh and I remember back then, like you submitted everything like through snail mail, and I submitted to a bunch of agents, I submitted a bunch of editors, and I sent them mostly snail mail letters. But then I think people were starting to have emails. I'm so old now. This is the year like 2000 or something like that. And so like, before all the people in the Zoom were born, pretty much. Uh, but yeah, like, and I remember like the agent that I was working with at the time, like she actually she rejected me by snail mail, but then she accepted my query by email, like so she saw one query and said no, and then this exact same query in a different sort of format and said yes. So it's like kind of like a weird fluke, like she just woke up one day and was like, oh, I'll give this a chance, and another day she was like, no. And and so I sent that out, and then I'd also been sending out to publishers, and I didn't read on the Penguin Canada website. This is like a very sort of rudimentary website that they didn't accept slush pile submission. So like sometimes your like complete ignorance and inability to follow rules can pay off. I'm sorry to say that. I generally recommend following all the rules uh, with publication, but in this case, the publisher wanted to see it, the editor at Penguin Canada wanted to see it. And it's funny, like both the agent and editor, like called me the same day to say they wanted to do something with the book, and it was like really exciting. I was 24 years old at the time, and that was my thesis at grad school at Columbia University in New York, which Lindsay also attended, and other friends. And Yeah, that was my first book was published a year later, and I started writing it in 1998 when I was like 23, and it came out when I was just before I was 26, and I thought that was a really long time. And in retrospect, I was really lucky, and I wrote really quickly, and that was a story about how I got sort of my first book published. I could tell like another long-winded story about all the other books, or like six more long-winded stories. And the books my books have had like highs and lows, uh like some of the books didn't sell very well. Some of them didn't get any awards or get noticed for anything. I've also had this parallel track writing like newspaper magazine articles back when there were more newspapers and magazines to write for. And then I sort of transitioned into teaching, which I enjoyed doing. And what else is worth talking about? I'm proud that I kind of just I keep writing. I'm happy just to be still writing and still excited about writing, and reading, is also an important part of it. And yeah, that's probably where I should stop. I could talk for the next 30 minutes just about every book, and that sort of trajectory, which is up and down, and I think you have to really like what you do. You have to really like writing, and I do. I like it in some ways, like writing like the first draft and revising it more than I do like having a book out, and promoting it and being outside in the public, because that's kind of like stressful and scary. And whereas writing a book and just being at home alone, that's really my jam.
Yeah, that's spoken like a true writer. I don't think any writer enjoys promotion. I mean, there's like a couple, but they're very rare, right?
Yeah, there's
It,
the writers who are also like actors or something. There's something like
yeah,
about them that makes you think like, okay, you're not like a pure writer. You're like a writer slash marketer or something like that. There are people who like it a lot, actually. I think there are quite a few, but yeah, definitely. I think a lot of us also are have like a love-hate sort of relationship to like book promotion and literary festivals and all those things. And there's a whole like sort of like element of self-loathing that I think a lot of writers have that these public events sort of bring out.
yeah. I mean, they are fun because you get to gather, you get to see people that you've just been following online, right? And then that's that social element. But then at the same time, there's that performance expectation of you, right? To be witty, entertaining, to sell your books, which is such a different skill set than staying home and writing. Um,
Mm.
you mentioned, like agents and many books, and I know you're someone who's had a lot of agents, right? And we were talking today about agents, and so like, how do you, decide when an agent is not working for you and you want to leave, right? I think a lot of them felt kind of intimidated or like, oh no, now I have to query agents. Like, what do I do? This is frightening. But it's almost just like a rite of passage in so many ways.
Oh yeah. I've had so many agents. It's crazy. I forget how many I had. Like I think it's like sort of like a friendship or a romantic relationship. I feel like sometimes like some people have that ideal where they have an agent that sees them through all the ups and downs of their career and they're a best friend and they read and understand their books perfectly. But I don't think I've always had that feeling, like, and I think sometimes friendships are things that aren't meant to last forever, that serve a purpose in your life and you outgrow them or they outgrow you. I've had we've all had friendships where, we've been ghosted, and then we've also had friendships where we've ghosted people, and it can hurt. And with agents, there are times where like they are very excited about you and they are the best person for one book, but then you read another book and they're not as excited about it, or they're distracted because they have another author who's a really big deal and you don't get much attention. And like like the emails that they would respond to within a day in the past, they respond to a week later. It's kind of like you kind of feel that sort of coldness. Like sometimes I've had people or friends who've had their agents drop them, because they're just busy, and that's sounds terrible. A lot of times I think with an agent I had in the past, I really felt from them that they were done with me, like just through some of the things they said and through some of the ways they sort of reacted and sort of how slowly they reacted to things I sent to them, like it was like, it's time for me to uh cut them loose. I think that they were trying to get me to break up with them, I felt like. and
Mhm.
and and you want to work with somebody who's enthusiastic about what you're doing, like we're all married to this idea of like having this perfect sort of author agent relationship, but I can attest that that's not always the case.
Yeah, no, it's true. And I think it's really hard though to drop someone after many years. I know I find it very difficult, right, to be like goodbye. But I think, it requires, you know, a strong sense of boundaries, right?
Yeah, well, like you like this is the person who serves a bunch of books and they'll get through it, like losing
Hmm.
you, like losing me. Whereas, you have to serve your book in the best way possible as you see fit, like and sometimes it's just like a fit, like you realize you talk to your friends about their agents and how they feel about them, and some of them are starry-eyed and some of them are talking about how much attention they get, and you're like thinking, well, that doesn't happen to me. I don't have the same sort of feeling, and then you sort of you think, okay, maybe I'm being underserved here, and so you maybe you send out some queries and you try to like talk to other people, like I wouldn't, you wouldn't sell yourself short. And I've also, sold books without an agent too, like in between having books that have an agent, and that's sometimes the right thing to do for certain kinds of books, especially, like smaller books.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Today we were talking also about small presses versus big presses. So I gave them the whole, the whole publishing spiel, real talk, right? I gave them warts and all. Um, One thing I really want to ask you is that I admire how prolific you are. We talked a little bit about this before we came on the Zoom call. And is there a secret to longevity in publishing? How do you find the motivation to keep going if you get a bad review or a rejection or if a book is not received well? Some of our students have said to me that they're really afraid of being rejected and they would just die if they got, a really bad Goodreads review.
Oh,
Um,
oh no.
so how do you keep going, right? Because you've been publishing since you were like 23, right?
I still get really bad reviews, and I look at my Goodreads probably more than I should, and at this point, like, it's pretty easy to keep going, like I like writing. I like the act of it. I like sitting down and doing it, and I feel like most alive and awake when that's happening. It's really exciting. I had a really good year where I wrote pretty much every day for like 10 months, and that's really a good year in a lot of ways, like I've been fortunate in terms of not having that much teaching work to do to be able to do that. Um, and it's tough. I don't think you should ever not care about getting a bad reaction or a bad rating or whatever. I feel like if you're a writer, you're someone who's sensitive and conscious of people and observe people. Uh, but then I feel like at some point, you hit some sort of saturation point. You just don't, it doesn't matter. You just keep going, and like I'm one of those people, like you were saying, like 99.5% of people would say nice things about Kevin. And I was like, I can think of who would say the bad things about me. I think a lot of us who when faced with overwhelming nice things being said about them will fixate on the little negative thing they say. And that's something, you have to watch in yourself, to not do that because it's the key to having an unhappy life if you fixate on all the negative things. And so, like you work through it. It's not like it's an ongoing sort of process. Like how do you deal with rejection? How do you deal with failure? Like you do and you find a way and you kind of like chew through it in some ways. I wish I had some sort of smart, sort of pithy way of talking about it, but it's just a matter of, I think, getting enough of it and then realizing it. You could quit at any time, but you don't have to write. You can be someone who doesn't write things, who just does all the reviewing. You could be the person who gives every book they read like a one-star review and trashes everything. But that sounds miserable, right? And I think the people who write those reviews are often like that too, like they're too afraid to do anything of their own, and they just sit around like trashing things, or like, and let them be that way, but we don't have to care too much about what they say. We can sort of let it sort of ruin 5 minutes of our lives, but not 10 minutes or not 20 minutes or whatever it is. We can just sort of keep going.
Hmm. Yeah, no, that's good advice, right? Because no, not everyone is going to like our books, right? And it does hurt, right? Especially when you release a brand new book, right? That wound is still fresh. But I find like over time, months later, years later, you can start laughing at these bad reviews.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like, and I feel like sometimes you feel wounded because they're attacking you, or
Hmm.
they're attacking your book, and your book kind of like your kid. But they're just, they have like every time someone reads a book, it's their take on a book. And Goodreads is sort of like like I thought this book was going to be a spy thriller, and you didn't write a spy thriller, but they still give you 1 stars. And that's how they rank things. Like based on what they thought it would be. Uh, that may be totally incorrect. It's just what it is, and you kind of have to at some point turn the page and move on.
Yeah, right. Because the most important thing is to just keep going and write, right? In so many ways.
Yeah, I think for me it is. Yeah, just to take pleasure in the act of writing.
Yeah, and it's hard, I think, sometimes to find pleasure in it because it's work, right? Who wants to sit down and write? I guess you do because you do it every day, right? I'm like, I have a deadline. I have to sit down and write, and then that forces me to actually do the work,
I
right?
love
So
deadlines, like when I don't have deadlines, it's a bit of a struggle. But yeah, even without one, like at some point you just have to like just sort of gird yourself and try to do it because you know you like it and you have some time opening up and that if you don't do it now, when will you do it? And you start with something and I'm pretty good in terms of just like like getting sort of like streaky or getting like obsessive so I can force myself to get through a book, like as I was telling you earlier this evening, I wrote a draft of a novel and I was writing 500 words a day and I did it 5 days a week until I was done in July and or June and I didn't love it. So I decided I was going to write something else, which is kind of bonkers. It's not, I don't advise you writing two first drafts of things back to back, but that's what I did. And then I started writing it 1,000 words a day. And I found that writing 1,000 words a day was better than 500 words a day because it forced me to like come to decisions more quickly, and I feel like I feel better about the second book than I did about the earlier one, but I might return to the earlier one too, now that I've had a bit more time. Yeah, deadlines are great, and like I feel like people who are writers are somewhat obsessive, and I really like that. I really like the idea of just sort of entering the sort of like blank space on your screen and filling it up. And I think when I was younger, I was more disgusted by what I wrote, like a first draft, and more sort of like stalled, and I didn't know where things would go. Now I think I know a little bit more about telling a story, or just trying to keep a story going. I still don't know what is going to really ultimately happen or what the story is ultimately about when I start it, but I feel like I know enough that I have to keep more balls in the air for the story to be interesting to me and to keep writing it. I have to start off with like a strong sense of what the character wants in the immediate sort of 50 pages or 25 pages and from there I can build from that, yeah, and I think I'm better at making things hard for my narrator. Like I think when I was younger I was afraid to do that. Like, well, this isn't really true to my life. This isn't really true to the world. Like bad things don't really happen to me or these characters. And so the bad things don't really happen to me like this, so they shouldn't happen to my characters. But bad things should happen to your characters, like they should have things be tough, and they should want things, and that's what's going to keep your story going, and that's hopefully what should keep your readers interested.
Yeah, that's great advice. And that's funny because that was something we were talking about today in class. I was saying, don't be afraid to throw rocks at your character,
Yeah,
right? Like metaphorical rocks.
yeah,
Yeah, right. Because usually a lot of people are sometimes too kind to their characters, right? I mean, I'm happy to kill everyone off, but I just return, like I get them to come back from the dead. But that's just me.
yeah. Well, that's
Yeah.
great. Yeah, well, I think that's like my novel I'm working on.
Oh
Like,
no, are we writing the same novel?
uh, there might be like some overlaps, like in terms of like maybe ghosts, like
Oh no.
I think they'll be different enough, and yours is coming
Yeah.
first anyhow, so you'll have the head start.
Well, I think our maybe our narratives will be cousin narratives.
I'm sure we could do a great like panel together one day.
Yes, that'll be fun. Yeah, I'm gonna ask you more about your novel later.
Sure.
But it's superstitious. I know we were saying like we don't want to talk about our novels because just in case something happens.
Yeah, or just in case, like, like you think it's about X and it's, like three drafts later it's about Y, like, and so you're like, you're talking out of your butt, like it's at an early stage in a manuscript.
Yeah. I've just been telling people it's about capitalism because I think that's what it's about, but it's probably not about capitalism. So,
No, yeah, well, like all books in some ways are about capitalism. If you think about it, like
yeah, capitalism or World War II. That's your safe answer at a party,
yeah,
right? Then people just like leave you alone, right? They're like, oh, okay, you're one of those writers. Goodbye.
yeah. Capitalism and death, probably
Hmm.
love. Like, you could probably say like most books are like 95% of books I think are kind of like about those in some way or the other. But
Hmm. Yeah, no, it's true. Um, Yeah, I think you were mentioning it a little bit about like craft. And we talked a little bit about this, like the double life of Benson Yu is metafiction. You know, you have Benny, who's a 12-year-old boy who's having the trauma. You have Constantine, the neighbor, who befriends him. And of course, you have you, who's the best-selling comic book author. And there's so many characters, and they're also written in this very nuanced way. And having written, so many books over the years, has your relationship to writing character changed? And I think a lot of students were asking, does it get easier in some ways?
I think it does. And in some ways it's always hard because every book is different. And I think as a writer you get more ambitious.
Hmm.
But I think what gets easier, and this is something I read somewhere in an interview with Paul Auster. Um, so I'm borrowing his formulation, but like I guess he was saying like it's still hard, but he knows that he will get through it. And I feel that way too. Like I have enough experience to know that this feeling of being sort of lost at sea with a book, not knowing what's going to happen, uh, it's it'll pass,
Hmm.
And you know what? I've also, given up on things too. I've worked on books for years and then I walked away from them. And I don't feel like that time was ultimately wasted. I feel like I used that experience for the next book. But that happens too. But it's all part of like the creative process.
Hmm. No writing is wasted, right? I always say, like, you come back to it.
Yeah, yeah. I don't really like it's not like I like, like copy and paste or I have everything saved, but I don't normally revisit it. But I feel like it's still in your head and it sort of informs you and sometimes it's like, what not to do, and you that's good too, like I think a lot of times like when you start off with nothing and you're starting a novel you have to decide what you're not going to write first before you decide what you're going to write, and it's nice to have some sort of constraint early on to kind of like keep you from being able to write anything.
Hmm. Yeah. I find that novels, especially if you're a first-time novelist, it becomes really unwieldy, right? It's suddenly like if you don't sit down and plan it, it just gets completely out of control, at least for me. And then for me, it's like going back and then kind of writing it back in and doing all the editing and shaping.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I agree.
Hmm. So with this book, right, you have a narrator and you have two characters. What was the process like crafting and executing the structure? Because it's very slippery, it's very complicated, right? And it's very layered. And as I mentioned before that I was one of the people who didn't understand it. I was like, what's going on? Tell me more. Is he crazy? Like, what is it? Um, and so I wonder if you could maybe talk us through that process.
You know what, I had to like figure it out kind of I guess I had to figure it out in a way that was organic to me, in terms of the structure. Like I didn't know it going into it. I wrote a story like where I only knew that it was a kind of going to be about a boy who befriends somebody and he's on his own because his grandma dies and he's sort of taken in by this stranger and at some point he would be sent to his dad who and it built up this dad to be like this really mean person and like I wasn't sure how I could write that dad character to be that mean. Like I kind of like setting up things in some ways, like surprising you with something else or undercutting things. And and I realized when I set up this dad to be such a ogre, like I couldn't write a character like that. And so I was for a while I was writing, getting closer to that midpoint of the novel where you get sent to the dad, and I was like, who's the dad gonna be? I didn't know. And at some point I was like, what if the dad was like, Benny himself, And I was like,
Mhm.
it's kind of silly, in some ways. Like it's kind of ridiculous. It went from being a realistic novel to being like a novel that's not realistic. And then I had to like think, what kind of story would it have to be for a boy to be sent to the adult version of himself? It could be like a
Mhm.
fantasy novel. It could be a time travel novel. And I didn't really want to write that, I kind of tease that it's a time travel novel, but it's not really, And I was like, well, it's a story about storytelling. It's a story about someone revisiting their life. And and so once I got to that point, and I got, like the child Benny with the adult author Benny, uh, I had them interacting, and I had to go back to the first half and really like try to figure out how I was going to set up this story so that I knew all along, so that the readers would know all along, or be at least sort of set up for the fact that there's going to be this twist, so to
Mhm.
speak. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what was the best way to set that up. It was a lot of trial and error, and eventually I kind of settled upon having this sort of Benson, the adult author, you, and I thought of you, like as like YOU as well as like YU, um, I was gonna have him just sort of be more present as like as a narrator, as a voice,
Mhm. Wow.
and that sort of in some ways structured the novel. And also, you know what, like first half of the novel has like alternating narrators, and it goes from the perspective of alternating main characters. It goes in the perspective of Benny and Constantine, and I really like that. I like kind of like going from one person's head to another. There's a bit of a tension that sort of is established, like trying to figure out how these narratives will intersect. And then there's kind of like the story once they do intersect and like what each character will think of the other. Uh, and I found that that tension was really useful. And then in the second half, it's between like, Benson and Benny, like you and Benny, and you had that in a different way. And I think that was fun to write.
Hmm. That's interesting. It's always like really fascinating for me to hear how another author plots because I have a really, I don't know, I have almost like a very different experience of going on the page. I have to see it, everything written out before I can sort of plot the novel. So it's almost reverse, right? But again, it is trial
But
and
you,
error.
you have to like write everything first, and then
I
you
have to write everything and then I'm
yeah.
like cutting 30,000 words out because I just can't see it sometimes. Or it's always helpful to have an editor to be like, we're going to cut 40,000 words and then we're going to move this perspective. So I need a lot of editing.
That totally makes sense to me,
Mhm.
and like that's like reverse outlining too. You kind of have to kind of create the big block of marble that you end up sort of
Yes.
sculpting. And I also heard like E.L. Doctorow. I was reminded of this quote recently of E.L. Doctorow talking about like as a novelist, he's like driving in the dark, and he can only see as far as the headlights. But eventually get to his destination, and I like that, like you don't really, you'll get to your destination, you might sort of take some detours and go in a roundabout way, but you won't kill yourself, you won't hit a tree, you'll just need to drive slowly and be patient and be alert, but you'll get to where you need to be, and yeah, I know some people who outline very meticulously. I wish I could do that. I really don't know what my story is going to be about or what my story is. I start off with, like very little. I start off with like some things I want to think of, some things I don't want to write about, certain kinds of relationships I want to write about, like, and it's funny how different things that are in my like kind of seep into the narrative as the story continues.
Hmm. It's great. Yeah, I make them do Save the Cat in my long form class because it's just so clear and it's really, I
Yeah.
think it's really good for when you're writing genre or YA. But when you're moving to like literary fiction and you have many, many points of views, like I guess like we're both doing, Save the Cat doesn't always work, right?
No, no, like, but when I had a novel writing class I taught a couple years ago, and I made them write something, follow like a screenplay structure, and it's like it's useful to think about everything a story needs. Like, otherwise, if you're teaching a novel class, your student will write the first 40 pages and they'll just have like backstory for all the characters, but they won't get to the crisis points, and they won't get to like the midpoint reversal. And all that stuff is like useful to think about as a writer. They might not finish the novel, it might not be useful, but it'll get them thinking about the sort of elements you'll need in a longer form piece of narrative.
Hmm. Yeah. I want to just skip ahead and ask you a quick question about mentorship because I know like a lot of, students are always saying like, well, how do I find a mentor when I leave school? Because school is like where you can talk to your professors, you have a
Yeah.
community of people. So how do you join a literary community? Because I know like, CanLit is always criticized for being inaccessible or gated, right? So if you're a new writer, like how do you find those people? How do you find mentors? How do you find other writers when you're not at school anymore?
Well, like I feel like the best sort of community are the people, not like necessarily like horizontal where, like there's some sort of accomplished person who will show you the ropes of publishing. Like that can be nice too. Like it's nice to have those people, and I've had a few of those in my life. And they help you without necessarily expecting anything. That's the thing that's amazing,
Mhm.
and I think you just pay it forward when that happens. But also like the people you meet at school, you stay in touch with them, you meet up with them for coffee, you talk about writing, and maybe you write together in a coffee shop, maybe you meet up and you submit your work to literary journals at the same time. And so it's less of a lonely act in when you do something like that. And that's really useful. Like the Writers Union has some sort of like social events, like they have a BIPOC mentorship program, which is helpful. Um, some people like, we teach in creative writing programs, and we focus mainly on like prestige forms like literary fiction or poetry, but sometimes not everyone really wants to write that. Sometimes people really want to write like fantasy and or like science fiction, and they have communities online and in person that you can form. Sometimes you want to be like a slam poet or a storyteller, and those have events too. Those sort of forms have events that you can like attend. Like a lot of times it's a matter of just sort of like being present in a community, like filling a seat, like clicking like, and and sort of just chiming in, like I see people like really move quickly online, like there are people who who just like are very aggressive in some ways of just being
Mhm.
like forming social media friendships, liking people's posts, going to events. In some ways it's like they're like it's like super aggressive in a way that like I really can't relate to, but I see it work where like they make friends really quickly, and their presence is really really valued very quickly because they're just there, like I forget who said like 80% of life is just showing up, like it's probably somebody odious, but like that's true. You just show up to the place and you belong, it's uh there's like a lot of truth to that, like you like 80% of life is just, like writing a story and sitting out in the world. 80% of life is show up to lit vent and then all of a sudden you're a part of the community, I think that is huge. And like, you know finding your people, and treating people well too. Being like reading work, being nice, uh, doing things without necessarily the expectation of getting something back right away or getting back something from that person. Like I think that's all part of this sort of idea of community that I think I have.
Yeah, and it has to happen organically, I think, not just online, because sometimes online can feel aggressive if someone's like constantly DMing you or messaging you, and you're like, who is this person, right? You kind of have to like show up the
Yeah.
event and just casually chat to someone like a normal human being, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah, when someone like adds you and then they start like spamming you with like their requests or their events, like yeah, I unfriend like right away, like yeah, exactly.
yeah, I don't even respond, right? Or sometimes people will post like a really negative review online and then, they send you a DM and say like, "Oh, by the way, will you like blurb my book or will you write me a letter?" right? And it's sort of like the idea of, I mean, community doesn't have to be reciprocal, but you just have to be nice all the time, right? I think
Yeah.
if you're asking for a favor.
Blurbing has been really intense in my life like recently where I've had to like I have an ongoing queue of like 4 books I need to blurb, and every time I read one book and I blurb it, like there's like another one that just pops up, like and and at some like a couple of weeks ago I just said, I just have to take a break from this because it's just all I'm doing is reading books that I don't necessarily want to read at this time, and
Yeah.
it's not good for my well-being to do it. But it's a desire to be helpful. It's like you're being sort of. I think I'm also being a little vain, thinking like, well, it's nice to be asked, and I won't always be asked. But then like I like to read for pleasure too. Like I don't necessarily want to like completely professionalize my experiences as a reader.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. But you so very generously gave me my first book, a blurb, right? So I
A
appreciate that.
pleasure. Oh yeah,
I
yeah, exactly. That's
wrote
part
my
of the
very
blurb,
first
right?
blurb. I was so nervous. I was like, "Oh, hello, Professor Chong. Do you remember me?" But
Yeah.
yeah.
And wow, it's really that book was such a hit, like it was great. And I was happy to be part of it and happy to be a little like to have my name attached to such a big hit. You did great, and
Thank you.
it was fun to read it, Sometimes you get exposed to work that you really enjoy, like yours, and I think that's the great part of sometimes being asked to blurb a book when it's a good fit.
Yeah, sometimes I know I have three in my inbox that I need to look at, and I'm just like sweating because I was just like, I have to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I got a couple of requests from like books that are like 400 pages too. That's like
Yikes.
so much easier to blurb a 200-page book than a 400-page book for me.
No, the pain of a writer. Is it okay if we just jump to a lightning round? Do you feel like
Sure,
doing
yeah,
one?
yeah.
Okay. All right, and then we'll end because I know it's getting late.
Okay.
Um, being an author is like fill in the blank.
Uh it's like breaking out of prison with a spoon.
Oh, okay. I like that.
Yeah.
It's
Just
so
chipping
true.
away at it, trying to
Yes.
know exactly how to get out.
I like that a lot. That's like writing a book. Um,
Yeah.
one thing you wish you had known before becoming a creative writer.
Uh one thing I wish I knew as a creative writer, um, that I'd like writing more than I'd like publishing.
Mhm. Yeah, no one likes book promotion. Usually the one like crying in the bathroom before I have to
No,
do an event. I'm just like, I can't do this. So what is your writerly superpower?
I'm really good with deadlines, I
I
think that,
know. I'm jealous. I'm just like, I mean, I've heard amazing stories where you get on a plane and you finish a book, like or article. Like that's how fast you are.
I've gotten good at that. Like, it was funny. Like, I was saying to you earlier that I finished a draft of something, and I've gotten really good at writing on my phone. Like, I write on Google Docs, and so it's everything's in the cloud, and you can sort of download from the cloud too. So when you're on a plane, you don't have to be online to write. And so I'll write on the plane because I'm on planes a lot, and I was like at my daughter's soccer practice. I had like an hour before she was done, so I was writing in my car. I was getting near the end of my book, and like 6 o'clock came, so I had to go pick her up. But like they were still practicing, so I brought up my phone and I finished the last paragraph of my novel while I was like watching her finish her soccer practice. And that's like, yeah, like it's not, I think like sometimes like earlier in the draft, I'm not sure I would be able to do that, but like at certain points in the writing process, like you just want to like do something productive. I guess I have this real like fetish for being productive. I don't think that's necessarily a healthy thing, and I don't think everyone, being productive necessarily means that you're okay or you're great or anything like that. But I definitely do have something like that, and so yeah, yeah, I try to like get work done on planes and things. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I know I've been doing that. I just like on Google Docs, you put it online and you're just like writing or editing or doing something.
Yeah, and you know what? Another thing that I've learned just being older is that I just don't care how good or bad it is. It doesn't have to be a perfect sentence every time I write, like you can make it better incrementally as you continue writing. And like writing's a lot like rock tumbling, it takes forever and it's like very, very slowly you can whittle it down. And I think you're aiming for a perfect sentence and a first draft can be debilitating, especially if you write something and you realize, like I have, that 50 pages that I wrote twice, it has to be cut out because it doesn't serve the story, and you spent all this time doing it, but it wasn't necessary, like that's part of the writing process too. So you don't need to get that obsessed over the sentence that early on in the draft.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's good advice. I think that when you're newer or younger, you tend to, at least I did, I always obsessed over the sentence, right? But now it's story first and then the line level.
Mhm.
What are some books that you wish you had written or something that you admire or envy in other writers' styles or writing habits?
Oh, I admire some like writers who are really good at writing about the natural world and
Mhm.
describing like trees and foliage. I think those are the writers. Like I don't really do that very well. And books I wish I had written. I just started reading this Catalonian writer named Eva Baldazar, and she's writing these 100-page books that are like they're like from a queer woman's perspective, but I wish I could write like that. I wish I could write like these amazing, obsessive, beautifully written 100-page books. Like I don't write well enough that I can write a book that short and have it sort of work out. And I like shorter books more than longer books. So I wish I wrote books like hers, or yeah. I'll just leave it like that. There are a lot of books that I wish I could have written, or writers who I admire and who do things I can't do. But she is the latest person.
Hmm. Yeah, I've not read it, but I'm putting that on my list.
Yeah.
Pet peeve in can lit.
I think there can be kind of like I think a lot of people, like it's such a small world, and like our successes are ultimately really, really small compared to like the money you can make as a writer compared to what like a banker can make. But there's a lot of, I think people can obsess over like how someone else is doing, like this is me included. uh and ultimately it's so minor that we should really try to celebrate each other's successes. Like one thing about being a finalist for the Giller Prize last year was like it made me want to be a better person, because like there were so many people who like came out of the woodwork to like just to say send me a nice note, and it was really kind and meaningful to me. And I thought back to all the times I've seen people I knew and liked who got on short lists, and I was like mainly jealous. I was like, oh yeah, that book was not great, or like, oh, it was pretty good, but like, and I realized like I didn't need to be that way, and it's ultimately very small potatoes, and I think we should have a bit more perspective, and this is me included.
Yeah, no, it makes sense, right? Because we all, book writing is subjective and we spend years just writing and writing, right? And so, there's some people who are just so openly jealous on Twitter, and it's sometimes a little bit frightening, right? But then there's so many other good people, and I end up forgetting about the good people and just focusing on the mean people sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, there's a little too much. Yeah, yeah, I would say that too. Yeah.
But your nomination was so well deserved, so I
Oh,
was
thank you.
really
That's very
happy.
nice. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Well,
was really
again, yeah.
happy when you were on the short list.
Well,
Um,
yeah, thank you so much.
yeah. So how would you commit the perfect murder and get away with it? Because I'm asking everyone this question, because I think creative writing profs and authors are very good at planning and maybe not executing, but we can definitely plan a murder.
Well, I thought like Murder by Milkshake would be pretty good, but like one thing I would add to a spin is that you'd get like a writing group, and like you'd find someone who's like almost a complete stranger with you who also has a grudge, and you would
Mm.
like kill the other person's victim. And so it'd be kind of like a little more secretive, like that you wouldn't know who your murder victim was. You'd have to do you have to do a dirty deed for somebody else, and so there'd be like a degree of separation. You'd be hiring
Okay.
a hitman, and yeah, probably. I think you were saying poisoning is good. I like the idea of like I think about murdering, and I think about like the things that really scare me, and that would be either probably dying from like a really high point, like being pushed off like a bridge or like the top of a tall building, or being pushed into like a subway or something in like a crowd or something like that,
Yeah.
So. And these days, it's pretty easy. Really thinking through this murder, but it's really easy to like to be in public with like a face mask. So you could wear a face mask, and that would be pretty easy to conceal your identity to a certain point. And yeah, yeah, yeah. I've thought a little too much about this.
Yeah. So, but that's like six novels there, especially the writing group. Like you switch murders and you don't know who did it. Especially like I would find another Asian writer who looks like me and then blame it on the other writer, right? Especially you
That's
could like blame
good.
it on someone you
Yeah,
don't like, right? And then
yeah.
they could take the fall for you.
Well, that's really good. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
There's
just
something
almost
there.
like yellow face, but with murder.
Exactly. Well, like you've got that's like a commercial book there in the work.
Yeah, no, one of us should write that.
Okay.
Well, you should. It's your idea. I just came up with the plot. Okay, so three dead writers that you would take with you on a 6 month residency on a tropical island and why? And then I guess we're gonna reanimate them as zombies, or do you want them as ghosts? These
Either
dead
is
writers.
fine. Like, uh, I was a big fan of Paul Auster. He passed away, and apparently he was like a really
Mhm.
charming person. So I'd bring him back, and then I thought like, wouldn't it be cool to have someone like from? I really thought really hard about this again. Like, I wouldn't want to bring back someone who didn't speak English. Like that. So I'd probably be stuck with somebody who spoke English, and then I was like, wouldn't it be cool if I brought somebody back from like a really distant pass. And I thought Jane Austen would be kind of cool. I thought William Shakespeare would be interesting, but then that was too obvious. So I'm gonna stick with Jane Austen as my second one, and Sylvia Plath because
Mhm.
I feel like I'm not like the hugest fan of Sylvia Plath, but I thought she was really had an interesting sort of life, and we're talking about bringing back someone from the dead. Like, do you bring back like their 90-year-old version, like them about to die version, or do you bring back the person like in the prime of their life, the prime of their
Oh,
career?
I just
They're,
assumed there'd be zombies. Like they would just like look the same. But maybe you're right if they're a
yeah, if
ghost.
it's a ghost, it might be different. Like it just
Yeah.
like who they are really inside, before they're all physically deteriorated. But then I thought, well, at least like Sylvia Plath was very sort of like at the prime of her life when she passed away, and so she wouldn't be like it wouldn't be like a 90-year-old person. It wouldn't be being brought back to life. So again, I thought probably too much about your question, and made your lightning round into kind of like the drizzle round.
No, you're turning it into like these are like minor novels, like or like short stories, I think, little novellas. That's great.
Yeah, just like kind of like you have to like you're entering my mind, in terms of like how I like how stories kind of get derailed in my novels.
No, that's great. We get to understand your process. And my very last question, the most embarrassing moment at a literary event.
You know
You can
what?
skip this one, but I want to know later. I always ask everyone.
Oh, it's fine. You know what? Like I drink coffee, and I feel like as I've gotten older, I just can't process coffee in the same way. And it's like anytime I drink coffee, uh, and I have to I can't use the bathroom. I obsess over the fact of that because I'm like on stage. So there have been times where I've been like at literary events where like it's like an hour long event and like 20 minutes in I have to go to the bathroom. That was like last week actually. And I think it's partly anxiety and it's partly I don't know like the diuretic effects of caffeine. But I just like I'm fixated on it. And I think last year I was moderating something and I actually said, I'm gonna ask this question, but I'm sorry, I have to go to the bathroom right away. And I just ran off stage to use the bathroom. That was the most embarrassing thing I think. I think I've had happen. Maybe there are other embarrassing things that I've sort of blocked out of my mind, but the big one. And I should really stop drinking coffee, but I still love it so much.
Yeah, I do too. I had to stop before a literary event because I start shaking and then I
Yeah.
drop everything, right? I get so scared. So I've cut out coffee. Yeah, but
Yeah,
it's
and I
so
think sometimes
good.
like I think sometimes I drink half calf these days, and I think sometimes that'll be good, but it's not, or even tea can sometimes have an effect, It's like maybe it's just all caffeine, but coffee definitely. Like I've had too much. Like last week I was in Alberta and I had a Starbucks at 4 p.m. because I was tired, and that was like a big mistake.
Yeah. Oh, were you in Alberta last week? I was in Calgary.
I was in St. Albert, yeah.
Oh, okay. So we just missed each other.
Yeah, there's a big distance between the two cities, but yeah, yeah. But I saw your pictures. You seem like you had a good time.
Yeah, yeah. I got to crash the festival and I did some other events. So yes, I didn't fall asleep. That's my most embarrassing moment at a literary event. It was a launch and you know how you're up at 4 a.m. if you're doing the press things. And then the last event is like 9 and someone was talking to
Wow.
me and we're on stage and I think for like 10 seconds I just fell asleep, right?
Oh,
I was like, this person said something to me and I woke up and I'm like, where am I?
oh, well, yeah, yeah. Like I feel like last year, like when I was on the being sent everywhere for the
The
book tour
Giller.
and the Giller and the stuff like that, I was like spacing out a lot. Like
Mhm.
I felt like yeah, I've been there.
Yeah, writer schedules are very like it's busy when you have books out. Like you're teaching, hopping on a plane, doing a talk, then running back, and then teaching class again, right? And sometimes you only have like 5 minutes to spare, so you get, changed in your office.
Oh yeah, I had this one thing where like I had to go teach a class and then go to the airport and where I teach in Kelowna, I live in Vancouver, but teach in Kelowna, I had to like rent a bicycle from one of those like bike share places to get to the airport. So it was funny. I just taught my class and I just like got a bike and I rode to the airport. It was just like 'cause I had that little time to spare. It was exciting though, and not everyone gets to go on like to go on book tours, so you try to appreciate it, but when it does happen, it can be a little exhausting.
Yeah, a lot exhausting and stressful. Um, so I want to just thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know in 5 hours you have to run to Kelowna, uh, less than five
Three,
hours,
yeah,
right?
3.5.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you have like hopefully get some coffee. I don't know if you quit, but thank you so much for spending your evening with us. We learned a lot from you, and we're so grateful for your time and your insight. Thank you
Oh
so
yeah,
much.
thanks, Lindsay. Thanks for having me. And it was great to speak in front of everybody in the class. And good luck with your reports. See you later. And I'll talk to you sometime soon, Lindsay.
All right, I'll email you later. All
Yeah.
right. Good
Good.
Night,
Goodbye,
everyone. Thank
everyone.
you.
See ya.
Bye.